All right, if we could go ahead and get started. When last we met for this class, we ended a look at Isaiah chapter 4, speaking of the beautiful branch of the Lord. And the last thing we discussed there was the remnant. We had two classes in which we focused on the remnant, that small group of people that has been consistent throughout the Bible, that remained faithful to God, that remained obedient to God. And so moving, and of course we're kind of going out of order because a while back we took a look at Isaiah chapter 5 and the parable of the vineyard. So we're going to move into Isaiah chapter 6 and see this vision that Isaiah had. But this remnant, as Isaiah did, remnant has to come to the realization of something in order to become that remnant. And I just wanted to read Brother Chesser's book in chapter 6, that's on page 31, these first two paragraphs. Speaking of chapter 6, there is a sense in which this chapter could well be viewed as the most significant chapter in all of the writing prophets. That is true because all the truths, principles, and experiences of these extraordinary men are related to or grow out of truths delineated in this chapter. Moreover, the manner and order of their occurrence are exceptional and vivid. There is not another chapter like this one in all of the prophets. It narrates the call of Isaiah to his great work as a spokesman for God. Isaiah saw 6 things in this chapter that changed his life forever. He would never be the same. And this is the quote I wanted to specifically look at. Every person desiring to make heaven his home by faith based on divine revelation must see what Isaiah saw. Every person desiring to make heaven his home by faith based on divine revelation must see what Isaiah saw. Now, not literally see what Isaiah saw. What Brother Frank is saying here is if we want to have hope of heaven, if we want to be found within that remnant, we have to come to the same realizations that Isaiah came to in chapter 6. So our memory work here is going to be taken from Isaiah 6 and verse 8. Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" Then I said, "Here am I, send me." That word also, we've discussed a lot of the also up to this point. Because we've put into context the world in which Isaiah is living. The nation of Judah, the state of the nation of Judah, was one of corruption, was full of idolatry. So we've set the context for Isaiah here. And we're about to look at the rest of the also here in the vision that Isaiah saw as we read it in Isaiah chapter 6. I wonder if I could get someone to read Isaiah. Let's read the whole chapter. Isaiah chapter 6.
In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above it stood seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one cried to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." And the posts of the door were shaken by the voice of him who cried out, and the house was filled with smoke. So I said, "Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of coal which he had taken with the tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth with it and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away, and your sin purged. Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? Then I said, Here am I, send me. And he said, Go and tell this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull, and their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, understand with their heart, and return and be healed. Then I said, Lord, how long? And he answered, Until the cities are laid waste and without inhabitants. The houses are without a man, the land is utterly desolate. The Lord has removed men far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. But yet a tenth will be in it, and will return and be consuming, as a terebinth tree or as an oak, whose stump remains when it is cut down. So the holy seed shall be its stump.
All right, thank you very much. So, as Brother Frank says, if we have any hope of having an eternity in heaven, we must see what Isaiah saw. What is it going to take for us to come to the same realizations that Isaiah did? To see what Isaiah saw here. And what we get the sense of, and looking at verse 5, is Isaiah is brought to his knees here. Isaiah is absolutely humbled, is just brought low with what he's witnessing here. And yet we can read it, and we don't have that same reaction from reading it, do we? This is an awesome scene that is unfolding here. Sometimes I think television and movies, they've ruined us, because how many of us pictured what was going on here as we read those words? Right? Michael Bay, the effects, the big effects director of movies, has spoiled us to where our imagination maybe doesn't work the way it should when we're reading. And so we're reading of this prophet so many years ago that was just brought low with what he was seeing. And yet we kind of just, okay, that's Isaiah 6. We'll just move on to Isaiah chapter 7 and just read it without the understanding or the gravity of what Isaiah had just witnessed there. And so, what's it going to take to see what Isaiah saw? And by the way, Isaiah, the prophets, these visions, we tend to think that they're just dreams that these men had, that it was way more than a dream. Many of these times where the prophets have these visions, they're awake. They're wide awake. And they're seeing these things happen as though it's right in front of their face. You're going to see this seraphim, or as Brother Tom read, the seraphim brings this coal, this hot burning coal, and touches Isaiah's lips with it. It's as though he's right there. He could reach out and touch him. These things are as real as you sitting before me today, or me standing before you. Very real indeed. And so Isaiah witnesses this scene as if he's there in person. Everything is touchable, it's tangible matter, and his response tells it all. First of all, you see this response, this awe of witnessing the glory and power of God. You have this utter horror that Isaiah feels because he recognizes, and this is where we're getting here with this, where we need to see what Isaiah saw. We need to see who God really is, and who we really are, where we are in relation to our position to God, the most powerful, the creator of the universe. We need to recognize where we are in position in relation to him. And then we find also a grateful and a willing acceptance of the commission that God offered Isaiah. And so, what we read here, we're going to break it down, each of the elements of this vision of Isaiah, and what you see before you is not going to do justice what Isaiah did. In fact, I'm sure Larry could do this a lot better. I used AI and Photoshop to put this together, because I didn't see a picture of a seraphim online that matched what I had in my head. This kind of closely resembles it. And so, and also you'll see some things just aren't accurate from the text, because I know my limits. So, the vision of Isaiah in chapter 6. First of all, we note first, it's the year of Uzziah. We've talked about King Uzziah, and the year of his death is a significant moment in biblical history, particularly in the context of Isaiah. You have Uzziah, also known as Azariah, as the 10th king of Judah, reigned for about 52 years. If you look at 2 Kings chapter 15 and verse 5, became the king at the age of 16, and he ruled from approximately 792 or 791 to 740 or 739 BC. And his reign was marked by military strength, expansion, prosperity, but his reign would end, as we've discussed before, 2 Chronicles 26, 16 through 23, when he was struck with leprosy for intending to burn incense in the temple to enter. What tribe was Uzziah not a part of, that he should have been a part of if he wanted to enter the temple? Levite, right. So he was succeeded by his son Jotham, who followed in his footsteps as far as fearing the Lord goes, but he did not try to enter into the temple. So in Isaiah's vision, getting ahead here. So this is the year that it's said that Isaiah began his ministry, is during the year of Uzziah's death. And so as we've so that would be the year he started. Let's get into it. The Lord on his throne. The Lord on his throne. His vision takes place within the temple. And throughout the Old Testament, the temple resembled something of great importance. It resembled that thing that we lost in the Garden of Eden. The most important thing, the most valuable thing man has ever had that he lost in the Garden of Eden. What was that? To be in the presence of God, right? So that temple throughout the Old Testament, the tabernacle before it, representing the presence of God with the people. And so we learn in the New Testament that the new temple is what? The church, right? So, seated on the throne in this vision, he says, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. That's one thing I didn't have in this slide, is the train of his robe filling the temple. If I had to redo it, he'd be a lot higher up in the temple, but again, I know my limitations. The train of his robe filled the temple. This is a sign of power. It's a status symbol back in those days, in the days of Isaiah. And so, seated on the throne in this vision, who was not seated, first of all? You know, you don't have Uzziah, the king Uzziah, seated on this throne. You don't have Jotham, his son, who preceded him on that throne. Isaiah himself was not on that throne. And guess what? You or I were not on that throne. The Lord alone was on that throne. So Uzziah, for that matter, Tiglath-Pileser, who is the who was the king over Assyria at that time. He wasn't on that throne. Neither was Nabonassar, who was the king in this up-and-coming nation called Babylon. He was not on that throne. No man of any authority, of any earthly authority, was on the throne in Isaiah's dream. And we know that oftentimes we put men on this earth a lot higher than they need to be. Isaiah was not on that throne either. This wasn't a first-person view from the throne in this vision. Isaiah was a spokesman for God, but the authority in his message was only so because it was a message from the Holy Spirit. We can see 1 Peter 1, verse 21, how that the prophets of old spoke not of any private interpretation. They spoke as though they were moved by the Holy Spirit, right? So Isaiah himself was not on that throne, and Isaiah did not see me on that throne, didn't see you either. So if I make a claim or I stand on a certain principle, I better make certain it's coming from the one that's on the throne. It's not coming from any man on this earth, and it's not coming from me. A lot of people speak as though they're the ones on the throne when they're not. I hear so many things today that I just want to ask in return, where did you hear that? Who told you that, right? So he wasn't, if someone were to say, for instance, this man, he wasn't baptized into the Lord's church, but you know what? God knows his heart. And, you know, I believe he was a good man. I believe God, God only judges. I believe I'm going to see him in heaven. So who told you that? It wasn't the guy on the throne. We're told in various passages what it takes to enter into that kingdom, to be part of that remnant. You could say, I prefer contemporary service, where there's a band up there, so I feel so uplifted with the music and the piano, the guitars, the drums add so much to worship. And I just believe God, we worship God the way, seems right to us. A lot of people make that claim, right? Who told you that? It wasn't the one on the throne. So many claims we make, and they don't come from the Bible. They don't come from the one on the throne. So, say all that for a reason. Isaiah is seeing the Lord on the throne. He's not seeing anybody else on this throne. So first of all, he sees someone with all authority. He sees who has all authority. And the train of his robe, he says there, filled the temple. And that being symbolic of his majesty, his glory. The longer the train, I think the higher the status the king would have back then. So you'd see authority, you'd see sovereignty in this vision that Isaiah is seeing. The temple, don't forget that. The presence of the Lord this is something that Isaiah is seeing, the overwhelming presence of God with him. We read in a few passages, Psalm 11 and verse 4, the Lord's in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent. The Lord is in his holy temple. His eyelids try. His eyes behold, his eyelids try the children of men. And then Habakkuk 2 in verse 20 is, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. The Lord he is present. He's there in his holy temple. We know that in the Old Testament, that the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord, and tells us that in various passages. 1 Kings 8, 10 through 11, 2 Chronicles 7. Various passages show God's presence in the temple, and that was indicated how? With smoke, right? We know that in Exodus chapter 4, that tabernacle that When it contained that cloud, it indicated his presence. They were to follow that cloud. And then the New Testament temple, I wonder if someone could read 1 Corinthians 3:16 through 17, please. 1 Corinthians 3:16 and 17.
Do you not know that you are the temple of God and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? Anyone defiles the temple of God, God will destroy him. For the temple of God is holy, which temple you are.
All right, thank you, brother. So we are his temple, that being the church. Ephesians 2:19 through 22. We read, "Now therefore ye are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of God, and are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom all the building fitly framed together groweth unto a holy temple in the Lord, in whom ye also are builded together for an habitation of God through the Spirit." God showed his presence to man in the temple throughout the Old Testament, and that temple is the church in the New Testament. If we want to be present with God, if we want to be in God's presence, where do we need to be? In his temple, in the church, right. And so we see, Isaiah sees this, we need to see the same thing. We need to see who's on the throne, and we need to see where we need to be in his presence. So the Lord on his throne. Then you have the description of the seraphim. Any comments or questions so far?
Part of that too is he's on his throne. I think we also need to have the same awe.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to see the same vision.
Right.
But we need to find that same fear, awe that Isaiah felt.
Absolutely. Very important. And that's why I say I wish we could read the Bible and come to the same being filled with awe and wonder about God, just as Isaiah was by seeing it. If we could just read it and see in our minds what he saw, and we can do that in a way without literally seeing this temple. Verses 2 through 3, we see a description of the seraphim. There above it stood seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, with 2 he flew. And one cried to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. So the word seraphim here is an interesting one. The Strong's has this as it comes from, and my screen time's out, it comes from the word seraph, actually pronounced saraf, which describes a burning, poisonous, or fiery serpent. You'll remember in Numbers chapter 21, you have that venomous serpent that was being spoken of there. So it's a species. The same word or the root word is used to describe that species of venomous serpents in Numbers 21 and verse 6. And the fiery part of that serpent would be understood as what you feel when the snake bit you. So the Hebrew scholars have taken the usage where we see it transliterated as seraphim, such as here, indicating brightness in the sense of burning rather than shining. So what's being described is these shining angelic beings, these fiery angelic beings whose appearance was so bright that they would appear to be burning. And some have made a leap, that's my opinion, they've made a leap here in connecting the fact that Satan was in the form of a serpent in Genesis. So they'd take the wordage here and say, well, Satan's a fallen seraph. So, I don't know. We don't know that. But seraph, saraf, burning one or fiery one. is how they're described. They're described with these 6 wings. And throughout the Bible, we have different descriptions of angelic beings that are described with symbolism in mind. And the seraphim here are the 6-winged ones. As far as I could tell, they have one face. And I just picture a human form. I don't know. They've at least got hands, they've got feet, they've got a face, they've got 6 wings. That's what we know, right? So then you have cherubim mentioned in other scriptures. They have 4 wings, multiple faces. They're mentioned in Genesis, Exodus, and Ezekiel. Seraphim are only mentioned here in Isaiah chapter 6. So the description of the seraphim here is an illustration of the nature and the status of God in a way. They had a pair of wings covering their face. Now, why does one cover their face? So as not to see the holiness of God. It's a form of respect. We see in biblical times, it was a sign of respect and submission to cover one's face. You see in Genesis chapter 24 and verse 65, Rebekah covered her face before seeing Isaac for the first time. Moses, we know in Exodus 34:33, wore a veil to keep the people from seeing his face directly after it shone, after coming down from the mountain. And the same light might be described on Christ on the Mount of Transfiguration as well. We see in Exodus 3, Moses hid his face from God for fear of him, out of fear and respect for him. So we have these 2 wings, these angelic beings that no doubt would just floor you to actually witness them, and yet they are unworthy to look upon God, that they are showing this respect for the Lord on his throne. You have then these, just real quickly, the pair of wings that kept them airborne. That is, their movement was through the air, and which could symbolize many things, but likely speed in their service to God, their praises to God. One commentator notes, ready for instant flight in God's service. And then you have the last pair of wings covering their feet. And so the humility, the reverence before God's holiness is seen. We see that covering one's feet, or removing one's shoes, washing one's feet, covering their feet, a sign of respect and reverence back in those days. And so these seraphim, 6-winged seraphim, positioned above the throne of God, the implication being that they're attending to God, to the services of God. What we learn from this seraphim is there's none higher than God. The most angelic being you could imagine would still be a small speck compared with the power, the authority, the beauty, and the holiness of God. And so we can make a confession that God is high and God is holy, God is authoritative. It's easy to confess that, but is it easy to come to the realization, as Isaiah did, that we, and we're going to talk about this more in depth as we look at this vision, that there is none higher than him. So where does that put me? Where does that put me? The seraphim, these high angelic beings, look at what their declaration is. That's the next thing we're going to look at, is holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. What's that word holy mean as we looked at the remnant and God calling him holy? Set apart, right? Is it easy to say God is holy, that he's set apart, and then not position him in such a way that he is set apart above all things in our lives? So that's why Brother Frank says, and I think, and And I love the quote that you've got to see what Isaiah saw. If you have any hope of being in that remnant and having heaven as a home for eternity, you've got to see what Isaiah saw. You have to not just confess that God is high above everything, but you've got to act like it. You've got to not just say he's holy, but act like he's holy. Prioritize him and put everything else last. And that's exactly what Isaiah is going to do, and it's precisely what we need to do. Any comments or questions?
I think that's great. I think the idea that we have to see what Isaiah saw is really powerful statement.
Mhm.
Because we have to find a way to be brought to our knees,
Mm-hmm.
just like Isaiah did. Just like Paul was brought to his knees in Acts 9 on the road to Damascus.
Right.
Because for us, very different. We know more now than Isaiah knew at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Shocking, right? He's seeing God, but we know more than he does.
Yeah.
Because we hold God's complete, perfect law of liberty in our hands. We have to understand the gravity of that. If you go all the way forward to John 20, we see Thomas, who doubted Jesus. And what did Jesus say to him? Thomas said, I need to see to believe. And Jesus said to him, you've seen and you believe, but blessed are those who have not seen and believe. Well, that's us.
Yep.
Isaiah saw. We have to see through God's perfect law of liberty, and we'll be blessed. We'll be more blessed than anyone because of it.
Absolutely.
What a gift.
Amen. Absolutely. We're going to appreciate everybody's attention. Sorry for going a little over, but we're going to look at exactly that. We're going to see that Isaiah comes to the realization of who he is, and he's going to enjoy cleansing from it. He's going to find that he's unworthy to be in the presence of God, and we all are. But we've got to come to that realization first, and then we can be cleansed and be confident in going forward in our mission, in our commission that he's given us. Thank you all for your attention.